pre-show quid pro quo. Brad, you get one question. It can be any question in the world. It can be, what is my favorite kind of shoe? Who's my favorite athlete of all time? What major political figure is my absolute favorite? None of them. You have one question. Go ahead and ask it, Brad.
Okay. I've been thinking a lot about the past, thinking a lot about the future.
All right.
And sort of like a very strange question is, if you could travel back in time or forward in time,
Okay.
what period would you travel to and why?
I've answered the back in time. I said that I would like to go to Alexandria, Egypt, right before the invasion of Julius Caesar. So I would say forward in time, I would like to see how the planet is in about 110 years from now.
Does that seem close to you?
It does seem rather close, but I think it would be interesting to see, because I have this, one of my favorite heroes of all time is a gentleman I talked about a little bit earlier. I also talked about him in several episodes, James Burke. And his theory is that humanity has this thing that we just constantly do, in which we have technology that creates a problem, and then things get really, really, really bad until we come up with a new technology that solves that problem, but it also creates more problems. Then those get really, really bad, and then we create a new problem, and then et cetera, et cetera. So I think now we are faced with, it's not the end of the world. I'm not one of those catastrophists that think that we're going to blow everything up or the environment is just going to completely go away. I don't think that, but we are in a bit of a pickle. I am very curious to see how we navigate out of this pickle. I hope we don't do that thing where we just build machines that sucks the carbon out of the atmosphere. I'm interested to see if what I would like to have happen, where people start to use the idea of, I hate the word nature, but use her, Mother Nature, as some kind of a teacher to be able to understand how ecosystems work, how simple biology works, maybe figure out more about how these things that we call invasive species, they actually help things out, how large segments of biodiversity actually occur when agriculture meets so-called wild zones, because that is where the largest biodiversity exists. I'm interested to see if we actually take that course, as opposed to the old way of, oh, look, we've got a problem, and let's just solve it with some simple technology, and then that's going to create another problem. So 110 years, I think, is about that time frame. So I'm really interested to see how, if something changes in how we operate in the world, for us to be able to figure out this one problem. That I would go forward 110 years, not much more than that.
I'm glad you said that, because I do the same thing.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to see what people do with what they're given.
Yeah. We're in the old Chinese proverb, or curse, I guess, may you live in interesting times. We're living in some really interesting times. We've always been living in very interesting times. But I think now we've got something where we're at a point of us having to make a vital change in how we see ourselves in this world. Great question, Brad. Fantastic question. Hey everybody, welcome to What Magic Is This? A podcast that wants to fix your meanings. More on that later. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. I am joined today by a very special guest by the name of Bradley. Bradley, do you prefer Brad or Bradley? What's your...
I don't really mind. My mom calls me Bradley when she's
Brad.
angry.
Oh, sorry, you don't want it, Brad. Okay, all right. It'll be Brad.
If I was 20 years younger, Brad would be fine.
Perfect. So if people haven't listened to the podcast before, what happens is I give my guests a list of about 25 topics. They get to go through these topics. They have little links as to what the topics are about, and they get to choose what topic they would like to talk about. We've got a very, very cool topic today, and it is the topic of cartomancy. So, you ready to dive in, Brad?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. What is cartomancy? So it is a form of divination or fortune telling using cards. Most popular and second most popular form of divination after astrology are tarot cards. But other cards used are regular playing cards, oracle cards, Lenormand cards, otherwise known as the Petit Lenormand. Basically any kind of cards. So there'll be a little bit more on that later. Before we really jump into this episode, it has to be said, this episode is not going to be exclusively about the tarot. tarot cards get their very own episode. So tarot cards will come up every once in a while, but I'm talking about a very broad subject here, using any kind of cards for divination. There's another disclaimer to put on this episode. People take this stuff very seriously. Cartomancy, specifically tarot cards, are extremely, extremely popular. So I will say some things that will piss you off if tarot cards are your absolute thing, all right? So just be aware of that. I ask you, though, just park your emotions for a little bit here, just for a wee bit. Stick with it. You might just learn something, or maybe get some perspective that is a bit different. So don't send me any hate mail. I will ignore you. If there's one thing that I am better at than magic, it is ignoring people. So I just want you to know that for sure. Although I do use cartomancy and I do use tarot cards and I do use other cards for divination, it is not my go-to form of doing so. I just want people to know that it's not my absolute love. For a lot of people, it is. If it is, stick with it. You might learn something. Please, just calm down. No hate mail. Please, please, please. I do know what I'm talking about, though. And I'll let you be the judge if I'm just talking out of my ass. I would hope that I'm not talking out of my ass.
Yeah,
so
don't make Doug cry.
No. So before we begin here, I just have to get this out of the way as well. So there are some that would say that it should be pronounced cartomancy. I'm just going to say the word cartomancy, because if I try to say cartomancy, I will stumble over my words constantly, and nobody wants to hear that. At least I stumble over my words more than I usually do. So let's get down to a wee bit of cartomancy history. Brad, you ready?
I'm ready.
As we do, we're going to start with Egypt. There was for a very long period of time, where anything that was weird or esoteric or hermetic, everybody said that it came from ancient Egypt. It's like, oh, this new thing came, it's ancient Egypt. The same thing happened with tarot cards. I think it was Court de Gabelin and Comte de Melay, Etea and Eliphas Levi. So they would say that, oh, if it's mystical, it must come from ancient Egypt. Here's the thing, though. We didn't really, until somewhat recently, know where playing cards came from. But here's the thing. These people, they might be right in some respect, but although with a little bit of details wrong. So in 1939, a pack of 15th century hand-painted cards from Egypt were found, stashed away in a museum. I believe the museum was in Turkey. These cards were made by the Mamelukes. Do you know who the Mamelukes are?
No.
Mamelukes, okay. So they were Egyptian sultans descended from Circassian Turkish slaves who were brought to Egypt to serve as soldiers in the 13th century. So when we talk about Egypt being the source of tarot cards, everybody would say that, oh, you have to go back to dynastic or pharaonic Egypt. No, this is a little bit later than that. So, but it's still Egypt. So in a way that they're, as I said, they're still kind of right. These cards, they weren't investigated until about 1971. And what was interesting about these cards is that they had suits, just like the playing cards that we have now. The suits themselves were scimitars, which are a sword, polo sticks, coins, and cups. Now, if you're familiar with tarot, this is somewhat familiar as well. Cups, coins, swords, and sticks. They are absolutely gorgeous cards. If you have a look at them, they're really quite ornate. And before doing this episode, I did a bit of research to see if anybody has reproduced them. And luckily enough, I found somebody who has recently. They did a Kickstarter and they came up with a pack. So it's something to.
All hand done again, or just digital kind of?
The digital, yeah.
Oh, that'd be beautiful.
Yeah, they look quite cool, and they're a bit expensive, but who knows, one of these days. Christmas is around the corner, right? My birthday's a little ways away, but anyways.
Merry Christmas, Doug.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. They are absolutely gorgeous cards, these original Mamluk cards. They were used for gambling, mainly, and the game that they would play was called Maluk Wanueab, which means Game of Kings and Deputies. These cards most likely were derived from what are called Chinese money cards through something like the Silk Road. And if you don't know what the Silk Road is, then you need to find a different podcast to listen to. I'm just going to say that. Eventually, these cards made it to Italy because why not? We have documents from around 1379. These cards were called nabe. And eventually, napes Or in 1414, Spain had what were called joc de naps, which is where we get the term jackanapes from. Games. Those kids with their jackanapes, right?
Oh, those kids.
So these were derived from the Mamluk cards, and they're very interesting to look at as well. The cards themselves, they have a king and two deputies or viziers. Because at the time there couldn't be any depictions of the human form within Islamic culture, it just kind of has written that this is the king card, this is the deputy card, I think, for each of the suits. Also with the polo sticks, polo was a game that came from Arabia, and so the Europeans didn't really know what the game of polo was, so they took the polo sticks that were on these cards and just called them batons or cudgels or clubs. That's where it comes from. This card started to get handmade, but towards the 15th century, woodblocks and Gutenberg presses certainly helped with making these cards. At the end of the 14th century, some countries outlawed the cards or prohibited the playing or gambling with the cards themselves. Now, the suits, they change somewhat through different cultures, and this is incredibly interesting. I love how they took these original Mamluk cards and did very different things with them. So, of course, the Mamluk cards, you've got coins, you've got cups, you've got scimitars, and you've got polo sticks. And once it went to Italy, you had coins, you had cups, you had swords, as I mentioned, baton instead of polo sticks. In French, you had clover leaves, which were clubs, hearts, pikes, which would be spades, and tiles, which became diamonds. Spanish, they had coins, they had cups, they had swords, and then they had cudgels, or a club. In German, you had bells, you had hearts, you had leaves, which would eventually become spades, and you had acorns, strangely enough. I like that. Yeah, they had acorns.
Cudgels and acorns, completely different meaning.
Very. And there was a Swiss-German deck that they had, instead of swords, they had shields. I think that's something really cool. I haven't seen that deck, but I think that would be really interesting. The decks from Italy and from Germany and France, they were somewhat ornate. They looked the early cards that we have, they're very well detailed and whatnot, which means that for most of the time they were used by the ruling classes you got to have a little bit of money to use them. In 1450, these cards eventually made it to England, although Cromwell did a bit of a number on these cards. No gambling. The whole Puritanism started to go through the country. Eventually, when Puritanism bit the dust, the cards came back in a big way. Tarot itself is Italian for the most part. I think a lot of people need to realize that tarot is mainly an Italian thing, and it just spread from there. But we have to understand that these things start as games. They're games first. They weren't invented for the purpose of divination. They eventually became that, but they started as a gambling, and that is crucial, I think, for people to start to understand how to use these cards. Again, extremely popular with the ruling classes, but they eventually made their way down to the common folks. What about divination? So we've always been doing divination, seemingly for as long as we've been around. Anything could be used for divinations. The stars, animal body parts, bones. They would use knuckle bones almost as dice. They were called astragals. And my favorite was ornithomancy, which is birds. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I absolutely. Actually, no. That's my second favorite. My actual favorite is something that is totally under-investigated in occult circles, and it's called bibliomancy, in which,
you flip through a book.
You flip through a book, and you find something that is relevant to the question that you're asking. I think that let's bring it back, people.
Every single time.
Yeah, I would love to see bibliomancy make a triumphant return. Everybody knows how much I love books. So cards. The first mention of cards was in a 14th century poem that was reproduced en masse in 1519, and this is a fictional account of the use of cards as divination. In the poem itself, they were set down in like a magic circle, which is really, really cool, and also something that needs to be investigated a little bit more. Everybody knows I love my magic circles and whatnot, but cards with magic circle, that's really cool. So as far as divining with cards, we have no idea when exactly it started, but there is some pieces of evidence. We have oracle books in German. They were written in the late 1480s. Most likely what we could consider European cartomancy developed in Italy. Chances are what we consider cartomancy. It might have happened almost everywhere at nearly exactly the same time. It's just kind of how these things go. Europe it's big, and they didn't have cars, but things spread pretty fast.
They don't have TV. You need something to do.
Exactly. So why not do some divining by cards? We have some evidence, lot books. The popularity of these were very, very vast. In German, they were called Losbücher. I hope nobody's going to turn off my podcast. Apparently, I'm popular in Germany. I'm not too sure.
That was perfect pronunciation.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you, Brad. Lot books were basically what you would do is either through dice or through cards, whatever number combination of what you would have, you would be able to look up in this book and it would tell you what your fortune would be. In 1556, there was what's called a confessor's instruction booklet released, and part of this instruction booklet was called The Sin of Divining with Cards. And so it's a bit of a manual, but if this was made, chances are divination by cards was absolutely rampant by this time, and that's just the 16th century. In 1665, there was a deck of 52 fortune-telling cards made in, I believe it was on Fleet Street in London, and this is an incredible document. I'll have a bit of a link to it in one of the articles I'll put up on the website, but they're very cool. They use astrology, and yeah, they're really quite interesting. We know that in 1770, the great German writer and poet Goethe had his fortune told by cards. Also in 1770, we have Atea. So this is Jean-Baptiste Allet. Atea was a bit of a nickname. Do you want to know how he got that?
I think I can figure it out.
How? Go. What is it?
Write it backwards.
Correctamundo, Brad. Check out the big brain on Brad. Have you ever had that said to you?
Many times.
Oh, I'm not the first.
It always ends with be rad, though.
Be rad. I'd love it. Anyways, Atea, he said that he learned from 3 sorcerers how to tell cards. He's an extremely interesting figure. I might do a whole episode about him, or I might do like the Titans of Tarot episode. Maybe that's something I'll do one of these days. He's very interesting. But he came up with the term cartomancy. It was from Atea. So,
great.
Very important figure. In 1790, someone else arrived in Paris, and this would be the hero of our story. Enter Marie-Anne Adelaide Lenormand. Difficult to separate the fact from fiction with her. She was very good at making up stories. Obviously, she was a fortune teller. Pretty good at stories. We'll talk about this a bit later. She was born in Normandy in 1772. She was orphaned at the age of 5 years old and was raised and educated by nuns. She found herself in Paris around 1790, as I said. She said that she learned how to tell fortune from cards by gypsies, because why not? Actually, there was a book released, I forget when, I believe it was in the 18th century, that said that all cartomancy came from gypsies, and it was found to be a complete hoax. She said that she learned from the gypsies. We know from records that she was incredibly popular in Paris. Very, very popular. The stories of Lenormand are quite crazy. Crazy awesome is how I'll put it. The room that you would enter into before seeing her was kind of like a dentist's office. There would be like magazines and whatnot, and people that write down accounts. A lot of the women in there had veils over their faces, which tells you that she was popular with people that had money. Mm-hmm. And eventually an old woman would come in through a secret door in the wall, and they would beckon you to come in, and then you'd enter into Lenormand's parlor.
Fabulous.
And it's any picture you could have of a sorceress's lab. There were taxidermied bats and owls and crazy pictures on the wall of ridiculous, very much like my place.
Your apartment.
Just like my apartment. Bones. Yeah, she went full out. She also seemed a little bit terrifying. People talk of her showing up in just giant fur coats and hair unkempt and all over the place. And,
nice.
And she would do really strange things before starting out her readings, where she'd either measure your head or ask you what your favorite animal was, all of this kind of thing. But we don't really know how she performed cartomancy. There's a reason for that. But people that had their fortune told by Lenormand said that she read them and her readings were bang on. She nailed it almost every time. She'd tell them about their past. She'd tell them about their present. She'd tell them about their future. She was great at what she did. We don't know what cards that she used. There are things called Lenormand cards that we have nowadays. Most likely she didn't use them. Chances are she would use the French playing cards, which is where we get our playing cards from. There you go. I love Marianne Lenormand. She is just my kind of cup of tea. It's like many figures that I come across, people like Mary Sidney, who I talked about in the Alchemist episode. She had this fuck it, I'll do it myself kind of attitude. I'll find my own way. She didn't have any precedent. I love her to death.
She doesn't really fit with the times either, right?
No,
That's
not at
pretty
all.
cool.
No, incredibly interesting. But Paris just seems like such a cool place, and it always has been. What we do know about Mary Anne Lenormand is that she certainly read for the Empress Consort of France at the time, which was Josephine, which was Napoleon's wife. And she might have read for Napoleon. Never know. I would say that because Josephine had such a stranglehold over what Napoleon did, I think she probably did read for Napoleon.
Behind every good man.
Yeah, exactly. Lenormand died in 1843. Her nephew burned all of her books, burned all of her cards, but didn't burn one thing of hers. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't.
Her money.
Oh, of course not.
Yeah, her money wasn't evil. So
No, money's never evil.
No, exactly. So it wasn't tainted. So her nephew took all of her money. And this is why we don't have very much information about how she told fortunes via cards. But she had her own system. I want people to get this into their minds. She did things her way, which is incredible. Lenormand cards themselves, I do love them. In fact, I think that they're prettier than a lot of tarot cards, most tarot cards that you get. My personal favorite is a deck called the Maybe Lenormand, and it's a somewhat new take on the Lenormand cards, but still using traditional images and figure. It's just a lovely deck to look at. It's fantastic. Now the moment that everybody's waiting for. How to do this cartomancy thing, or how to read cards. What tools do you need? Well,
let me guess.
What do you need?
Cards.
Correctamundo.
Nice.
But how do you read them, Brad?
You're about to tell me.
I am. Look at the fucking cards, people. That's it. All right. That's it. And this is the easiest thing in the world, but yet the hardest to get into people's minds. There are lots of books with fixed meanings and spreads and how to use playing cards or tarot cards, what this card means, what it means when it's in this specific spread. You don't need any of that. Ignore them entirely or come at them later. That's all I'm saying. There will be things in them where a certain card will have something as specific as somebody's color of hair, their height, this kind of stuff, which is useful. But at this point in time, try to ignore that stuff. Come back to it later. There's much to be gleaned there, but yeah.
My mind is a blank.
There you go. Yeah. There seems to be no continuity as to how cards were read for divination, so we will concentrate on the how, not the what. So, I've got some cards here. Good old regular playing cards. Gonna open them up. There you go. So the first thing that you notice is that cards, they've got pictures and they've got other things on them. And you will see that they have suits. 4 different suits. First suit is hearts. Now, Brad, what do you think, just off the top of your head, what do you think that the suit of hearts would signify?
Emotions, love.
Correct.
Type thing.
Correct. What do you think, just not from what I was telling you earlier about tiles, but what does a diamond represent to you in this day and age?
Wealth.
Wealth, money,
prosperity.
Value. Correct.
Yeah.
But we will kind of switch the rules up a little bit. The spades. Originally, they were pike heads, or the heads of spears. What does that signify to you?
Troubles, danger.
Conflict.
Conflict, yeah.
Right. And then lastly, we have clubs, which came from, and this is the toughest one, always, plants, from trees. So let's even just go with clubs. What are clubs? It's a weapon, but it's also wood.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a hard one for people to get around, but let's try to think of it as growth, as work, as...
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Were you?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. I love it. When I read cards, and I just want people to realize as well that this is not how I use playing cards when I'm doing cartomancy. This is just a very broad example that people can try to apply to any cards ever. Look at the suit, and then also what do the figures on them, what do they represent? Now, usually I have them representing actual people, people that are in your life or around you, or figures that have yet to present themselves. You will see kings, queens, and you will see jacks. So a king would probably be, what do we think of as a king?
Oh, so like someone of influence.
Someone of influence,
Yeah.
Exactly. Big power.
Yeah.
Right. The most power. What do we think of about something like, say, a queen?
I'd say someone of power too, but someone that
A little less.
little less, yeah.
A little less power, kind of more reserved.
Traditionally,
power.
yeah.
Correct. And what do we think of when we think of like a jack or a knight? Also a bit of power.
I'd say more influence.
Influence.
I said that for the king, but like
Yeah.
the jack is someone that's closer to you and maybe influences you.
I like the idea of a jack sitting on a horse. His influence, he works fast,
Yeah.
but he doesn't have a ton of influence, right? Here's another thing to maybe get around with the cards themselves, and this is a great thing, and I don't think enough people realize this. It's what I said earlier. Look at the fucking cards, because the people are looking in certain directions. Now, this jack, where is he looking?
He's looking to the left,
But he's looking straight at...
straight at the hearts.
Exactly.
Well, straight at the suit, I guess.
So he's looking, this Jack of Hearts, he is concentrated. It's his fast-moving love or fast-moving desire. He's fixed on it. This king, where's the spade? Where's the weapon? Is it behind him? Is he looking forward to it? What is that exactly is going on there?
It looks like he's looking past the weapon slightly, or near it.
Right.
Right.
There you go. You're getting it, Brad. What about this guy? What's happening with this guy? Where's his sword?
His sword's behind him.
Is it behind him or is he stabbing himself in the head?
If I was to be a positive person, I'd say he's got it behind him, but he's definitely stabbing
So
himself
what
in the head.
what would a king who is got a heart there, who's stabbing himself in the head, what story can you infer from this card itself?
Love is pain.
Or perhaps that he is so fascinated and concentrating on love itself that it might do him harm.
That's right.
He might harm himself. Is this starting to make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Right. And what I love about these suits as well, specifically with playing cards, is a lot of the times the suit themselves will be in a different position. So for something, say, like the three of clubs, you will have one club that will be pointing upwards. You'll have a couple of other clubs that are pointing downwards.
I never noticed that.
Yeah, no, a lot of people don't. But this is also important as well. So the position of what's actually happening. So say three of clubs, that might, if we're going to equate that with work, that one top of the club might be maybe somebody or that some ambition that you have is by itself, and the other people that you might be working with are doing something different.
Good Lord, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay? So you're starting to get it, Brad.
We know each other well enough to know that.
I just love this kind of stuff. And look at the freaking cards. It's very, very simple. All the stories are there. They're just for the taking. So what happens if you just have one heart?
That seems very personal.
Yeah. Is it somebody maybe who's a loner?
Doug, it's the Ace of Hearts. Do you love me? Just kidding.
You know I do, Brad.
Oh, baby, yeah.
But what would happen if, say, like, that's because that's upright. What happened if, say, it was upside down, that heart? What would that say?
Well, the first thing that jumps out to me is that the point of the heart
Yeah.
is facing away from me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of a story anyway, but
Right.
yeah, it could mean the opposite.
Right.
Or it could mean reciprocal.
That's it. That is literally it. So if you start to have these cards and you start to put them down, they begin to tell a story. Just look at the cards. Look what's in their hands. Look at how many numbers of them are there. And specifically with something like the not face cards, a 1 means either ultimate, as in the biggest amount of love, or less, depends on what card's next to it. But if you have 10 of hearts, how much love is that?
Oh, that's delightful.
That's a whole lot of love.
Yeah.
There you go, right?
Yeah, give me that 10 of hearts.
Who wouldn't want a bit of 10 of hearts? But again, if you look at them, sometimes the 10 of hearts, there's 2 hearts there, and it's flanked by 2 columns of hearts, right? So what is that? Are those lovers being put against other forces that are trying to draw them apart, right?
Yeah. It's a love triangle.
Perhaps.
Or my dating history.
Brad, it's as simple as that. Look at the fucking cards. So
Fascinating.
let's do a little bit of an example here. And specifically with this kind of stuff, if you're starting out, or even if you're one of those people that let entirely into tarot, I would say maybe come back a little bit. Go to use the playing cards. But if you have 3 cards, that's the best way to start out.
Sure.
3 cards, and maybe you can move it up to 5, and then eventually you can work with something called tableaus, which are a lot of cards. Something that's good when you're starting out as well is to try and stay away from dumb questions. And I know there's no such thing as a dumb question. I try to tell people to stay away from yes or no questions. Will this person fall in love with me? No. Yes. Who cares? It's a waste of a question. But a better question would be, if I try to pursue this person, what could be the outcome? That's a better question to ask. And the cards will tell you.
Well, it's more informative too, right?
Right, exactly. There's a much bigger story to tell. Most great works of fiction start with a good question, or a good story, or a what if.
Or a good love triangle.
Do you have a question?
I do.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so if I decide to pursue, let's go with work. If I just decide to pursue another option,
Okay.
what does that look like in the future?
So if I try to pursue another job, what might one of the outcomes be?
Sure.
All right, I'm going to do a little shuffle here. Oh, I hope everybody hears that. Oh,
That's skill, bro.
I've got skills. Okay. We'll do 3 cards. And I'm going to do it pointing towards you so that you can read from left to right. Okay. So we have a 5 of clubs, we got a 2 of hearts, and then we have a jack of hearts. All right? Let's read these from left to right like you normally would do. So 5 of clubs, what do you see there?
I see a fair amount of work.
It's a bit of work, right?
Yeah.
It's a bit of work, but look at the card a little bit closer. Do you see one little thing in the middle there? And then there's 2 clubs pointing down, 2 clubs also pointing up, kind of moving away, right?
Yeah, I'd agree.
To a degree. Then the next card that we have 2 of hearts. Both hearts are going completely different ways, right? There's a bit of a split there.
Gotcha.
And then we have the jack of hearts. What is the jack doing in this card?
Gazing intently at the heart.
He's gazing intently at something that he loves. He's not stabbing himself in the head. What else does he have in there? He's got an axe. What's kind of interesting about an axe is that it's not just a weapon.
It's a tool.
It's a tool. It's more work, Brad.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a different kind of work.
But the heart sort of makes it feel like it's going to be a labor of love rather than drudgery.
By Jove, you might just have it, sir.
God, I'm going to use this for everything.
That's kind of the point. So what could you say if I was the one that asked this question? What would you say that the forecast would be? What would you divine for them?
Well, I'm going with chronological. I'm sure there's different ways of
you can read it from, if the story makes more sense going from one way.
So were these 3 cards to apply to you?
Yes.
I'm going to read them as though I am you.
Go for it.
You're in a place where there's a fair bit of work to be done, but you have everyone that's doing things in a different manner that might not suit what you're doing right now.
Got it.
What you're doing now is a little bit of love.
It's a bit of love?
It's a bit of love. So maybe the podcast is a little bit of love, right?
Right, yeah.
And then in the future, it would be similar to my course, which would be you're looking at something you love, but you know it's going to be a lot of work, but you've got the tools to do it.
Brad, it's an A+ right there, buddy.
I know. Call me Madame Ruby. Yeah.
Lenormand would be proud.
But look at your outfit, bro. Like,
I know,
that's
right?
That's fancy.
Brad, this is not rocket science.
There's a little feather in there too, which means it could be a little bit of fun.
A little bit of fun.
Yeah,
There
and if
you go.
if you do what you love, it'll be fun.
Right.
And then you could have the swanky outfit like your new shoes, bro.
Brad.
I said bro a lot, but I don't.
You did. I like it, though.
I don't normally.
Brad, it's as easy as that, Brad.
But give me another 3.
Give you another 3? That's it, Brad. It's as simple as that. You know what? I'm going to give the cards to you, Brad. Go ahead.
Okie dokie. Really
I'm going to
terrible.
ask a question, and here's what my question is going to be. What can be gained from me taking a 1.5 month long vacation to Europe in the summer?
This is facing you.
Yes. All right. Okay. So we got a 4 of clubs, we got a 9 of hearts, and we got an 8 of diamonds. So there's no real person in here. So this is going to be a little bit trickier, right? Mm-hmm. So 4 of clubs. That's a bit of work.
Yeah, it's a bit of work,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like because the clubs are facing separate directions.
Right.
It's kind of like, what do I do?
What do I do? A little bit of indecision.
Indecision when it comes to work.
Right.
The 9 of hearts is if you travel,
Right.
you're going to love it.
But I love it.
You know, there might be a problem because you don't have a 10 or
Right.
anything like that.
But that's a whole lot of stuff.
But they all seem to be facing you, right?
Right.
Like it all seems
They also
great.
all the points of the heart seem to be going towards this one heart in the center there.
Yeah,
Could that be me?
that could be you.
That could be me.
I think that is you.
Oh, buddy.
And I think that because you have such a high number for hearts,
Right.
which just thinking about it kind of from a biological perspective,
Sure.
you're not going to have any trouble with health.
No.
And then the 8 of diamonds,
Right.
I'm going to say that all 4 points of each diamond are facing you.
Okay.
So it's going to be good for you.
It's going to be good for me.
You know,
Maybe,
and it's
I'm going to get a lot of value out of it.
yeah, that's what I feel.
Right.
That's a good number to have, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I see absolutely nothing negative about going to Europe.
I don't either.
I see only positive things happening.
Bet you the next card I turn out is
It's going
like
to be the Ace of Spades, and I die. Guys, it's as simple as that. And again, I do not use playing cards this way, but it's a very good way of getting back to basics as to how to look at cards to create a story. And the story is where we divine our fortune from.
I'm super interested to see how that all turns out for you.
I think it'll be pretty good. There's more reason to go now. Wonderful.
I'm glad we did this.
So like a lot of things concerning magic, how you're told to learn and use it, you have to know the Kabbalah, you have to know Aleister Crowley's this, you have to know the Lesser Banishing Ritual, the Pentacle. This is way easier. Have the cards, throw some down, look at what's on the fucking cards. I like this system and I use it with any kind of cards. I'll use it with tarot cards, I'll use it with Lenormand cards, I'll use it with oracle cards. But there is one deck that I use above all decks, and that is not a tarot deck. It is a deck of cards that was used for a game first, and it was a Mexican game, and it is called La Loteria. Now, best way to thinking about it is that it wasn't even a card game. It's a Mexican version of bingo. So
That's amazing.
what you have is everybody gets a little bingo card, a bunch of images on it, images such as 2 arrows, there's a devil, there's a crown, there's a deer, there's a skeleton holding a scythe, there's a moon, all of these things. And when the person with the cards would call out what they have, you'd put a little bean down on your card. And if you get all 4 corners or a line or a cluster of 4, you'd shout out, Loteria! And you've won the game.
That's amazing.
When I first came across this, I fell in love with La Loteria. I love the images. For some reason, everybody who's listened to this podcast knows I adore Mexico. It's maybe as close to as I've ever come to finding a spiritual home, a place that connects with me. It's not the place, but it's about as close as I've come.
You blend really well.
You know what? I don't stick out as much as other people do in Mexico. I'm not a fat tourist, and I grow a pretty badass beard, and I look.
That's true.
I look
That's
like
true.
I've been there for a little while.
That's a pretty good beard.
Indeed. Loteria I use constantly for Cartomancy. There's about 54 cards in there. There's a bit of history there. It came from Italy in the 15th century, and it was brought to New Spain, which is Mexico, in 1769. The same thing with the playing cards. It started out with the upper classes, and eventually it drifted down for the regular people. Very reminiscent. A French businessman by the name of Don Clement Jacques created a deck and the images, which are a cultural institution. You see it in a lot of places in Mexico. I've seen it on the back of cars. I've seen people with the tattoos.
Oh, yeah?
He created what is called the Don Clemente Gallo. The gallo is a rooster, basically. And the very first card in the deck is indeed of a rooster, and it says Gallo under the rooster, and it's in a banner. None of the other ones have them. Anyways, they're a wonderful, wonderful deck. As I say, it's a national tradition. I absolutely adore it. I'm not going to go through it with everybody now as to how I use it for cartomancy, but the images are very striking. And I've always liked that you will have an image of a jug, and then next to that you'll have a really wonderful image of a drunk person just stumbling down a street.
I wonder what happened.
I wonder what happened. Exactly. And there's lots of skulls and skeletons, which I adore, and the devil's in there. So that is my go-to cartomancy deck. And I'm not saying it's for everybody. Again, it's very personal for me. They're great for tableau as well. I'll lay down 4 cards, and then another 4 cards, and then another 4. So 4 by 4. And I will do my divination based on how the scoring system of La Loteria game went. I'll look at a certain situation, and if they're clustered, I'll say that's a little bit closer. Or if they're in a line, this is going from what's happening now to what's happening further on in the future. So maybe I'm giving a little bit of hints as to how to use this as a deck, but it's very personal for me. And I just want everybody to know that there is your deck out there. There really is. Try to find your deck. This one's mine. You're welcome to use it, but this one's mine, and it's very important for me. I love it. just like everything in my podcast, this is about your journey. It's about creating your story.
That's very Bob Ross of you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, he's a great man.
Except you shaved your beard off.
Apparently there is a Catholic version of La Loteria that had saints and parts of a church and holy relics in it. I have yet to find it, but I bet it's cool as shit. And if anybody has one, send it to me. But it didn't catch on in Mexico. They wanted to stick with the John Clement Gallo cards, so it's wonderful. The creation of how you tell a story with cards and which deck is yours, it all comes back to this idea of storytelling. And at one point, not too long ago, Brad, you asked me, like, what do you do, Doug, with your rituals and your spells and the whatnot? And I said, yeah, I'll normally do this or I'll do a rite or something. I do weird shit and stuff happens. And you said, well, you do this stuff, but is it just self-fulfilling? And it kind of took me aback because, yeah, that's kind of the point of all of this. It's all self-fulfilling. So everybody who's listened to the podcast knows that I'm very big on story. I think that strangely, the universe seems to work in some kind of odd narrative way. And the more we work with stories and storytelling, the more we are honing in on what is actually going on. Because there's definitely something else here. If you read anything by Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, you'll know what I'm talking about. He's very big on stories and experience, and the fact that the strange things that happen to people are themselves a story. They follow some kind of a story, beginning, middle, and end. And that doesn't make them any less true. And I think we're figuring them out slowly. Many people have talked about how creating stories almost certainly creates reality. Specifically, you like magic, you know about guys like Grant Morrison, who wrote The Invisibles, or Alan Moore, who wrote The Watchmen, or V for Vendetta. Even other people like Angela Carter. And one of my favorites is somebody released an essay about how Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote the rest of his life after he did the poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. This kind of stuff happens. There are things of people writing the events that will occur within their life. And we can't dismiss it as coincidence. It happens time and time again. I keep talking on this podcast about how the book Time Loops by Dr. Eric Wargo blew my mind. This is all in there. There's some strange way that storytelling and creation of stories affects our future in some way that maybe the future stories we're telling are writing our present and vice versa. It's all retrocausation. There's something here. Dr. Eric Wargo put an essay out, which I will be putting up on the website, where his main conclusion is that all art is prophecy. And I do believe this. There's going to be a flip. You and I were talking about it a bit earlier, but I do think there's going to be a flip where we start to see experience as opposed to evidence as the way to navigate ourselves out of whatever mess that we're in right now. Bertrand Russell once had a quote that says, "The reason that physics and mathematics can explain our universe is not because we know so much about our universe, but actually because we know so little." And I believe this is quite bang on. Math is great. It's great for telling us certain things, but I do think that we need to understand the world more as a story, as poetry, as opposed to simple numbers and combining. I know people would argue saying, well, Doug, the mathematics tell a story themselves. It tells a slight story compared to the actual prose of existence and experience. Math is the letters themselves, not the combination of clusters of them to tell a story. That's the way I put it. So we're understanding through physics very small clumps of reality.
Do you mean clumps of letters in a word?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yes. Yeah. We've lost something. There is certainly a worldview dysfunction, and we have cut out the heart of life with mathematics, which are functional. I get it. They're there for a reason. But these abstract calculations do very little to tell us about how to navigate in our daily lives. I seem to think that this experience of storytelling, this subjective narrative experience, needs to be given far more credence than it is now. And this is not the place or the time to talk about it, but maybe I think you need to sit with, perhaps it's not you divining the future, but creating it through telling a story with cards, or a combination of the two. That's why I dislike rudimentary cut and paste fixed meaning shit in what constitutes most modern cartomancy. I think it's garbage. Start reading cards with what you have. You, your experience and interpretation, and the cards. That's it. That's all. If you have a new tarot deck, what will be included in them is called an LWB, or a little white book. It'll show you what all the cards mean. This is what this card means. This is the tower means catastrophe, or blah 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 blah. Throw that thing in the fucking trash. I don't think they're helpful in any way, shape, or form.
The images are so rich to begin with. Like if you're interpreting.
Brad, you were able to get an entire story out of maybe 7 small little pictures.
Nailed it.
You nailed it. Absolutely. So let's talk about fixed meanings for a little bit. Get away from them. This is your journey, numbskull. That's it. They are more of a hindrance than they are a help. Yet again, I cannot stress this enough. Just like everybody says you can't do magic without knowing this or that, or you need to know about Hermes Trismegistus and blah-de-blah-de-blah and all that garbage. I mean, I like Hermes Trismegistus, but you're trying to get what I'm saying, or the Kabbalah. Or you need to know the occult meaning of every single tarot trump. Magic and cartomancy are easier to do if you just avoid this and work with what you know already. Your intuition and process grows by leaps and bounds if you are not shackled with this need to memorize fixed meanings. You can read the cards better without them. Trust me on this, please do. What do the cards say in relation to the other cards with the story? How do they speak to you? Marie-Anne Lenormand would slap the Book of Thoth out of your hands if she saw you reading that. Guys, try to live up to her standards in some way, shape, or form. If you've never picked up a tarot deck before, start with playing cards. Start with the way that I showed you a little bit earlier. If you're already using tarot, I say go back. Go back to using playing cards for a little bit, or something else. Go through them. Work with them. I will only allow fixed meaning for 1 deck of cards, and that is a bit of a cheeky pick because you can't actually hold this deck in your hands, not yet anyway. So back in 2013, within the Magic Circle Museum in London, which is a group of illusion magicians, they found a deck of cards that were created in 1906, and they figured out that this deck was created by none other than Austin Osman Spare. If you don't know who this is, he's huge in chaos magic. He was an artist. He was a very incredibly interesting individual. Now, I could gush about this deck all day, and the reason I say that I would allow it for fixed meanings is because the meanings are on the cards themselves, and he does something interesting. He doesn't use the tarot suits. He uses the old playing cards, diamonds, clubs, spades, and hearts. He actually has what the card means written on it, what happens if it's next to this kind of card, what happens with it, and he was an artist. So what's really interesting about this deck is sometimes when the cards are placed side by side, they create a picture. And sometimes those pictures will be 6 cards long.
Wow.
They're incredible. This is the one case where I say fixed meanings are great because you can't actually have this deck, at least not yet. I have reached out to Strange Attractor Press, the people that released this book called Lost Envoy, which shows off this wonderful, wonderful deck of cards. He did it when he was 20. He created this when he was young. But what you need to know is that Austin Osman Spare, he understood story and image and its vital importance, more than a lot of people that use tarot nowadays do. Somebody else to look up to. And I would suggest Lost Envoy. It's a bit expensive, but it's a beautiful book. Where to go? Besides just buying a pack of playing cards and saying giver. In this instance, I will say teachers, not books. Some of the best teachers, they're around right now. I'll give you 3 of them. The first is Camellia Elias. She is great. I love a lot of what she does. She's got a blog called Tarotflections. She does courses online. She's got another blog, I think it's called Cartomancer. Anyways, I could be wrong on that. She really gets it. She does the whole look at what the cards are saying in relation to the other cards. Wonderful person to look towards. There's another gentleman by the name of Enrique Enriquez. He really fucking gets it. He knocks off all the crazy, it came from ancient Egypt. He just says, look at the cards. Look what's in the cards. Which way is the person looking? All of the stuff that I went through with you, Brad. He's big on this kind of thing. There's a wonderful documentary called Astrology, which I will link to in the show notes for this blog. Give it a watch because you can actually see how his process works. Very good. And the last person that I'm going to mention is Andrew McGregor. He owns a store here in Toronto called the Hermit's Lamp. He's got about 25 years of experience. He knows what he's doing. He's very good. He's written several books about the tarot. It's all great. He's got his own podcast in which he talks to other people about not just tarot, but cards and other magical topics. It's a wonderful podcast. Please check it out. He's a wonderful teacher. In fact, I asked Andrew to give his take on what makes cartomancy so attractive and what do you get out of cartomancy, and this is what Andrew had to say.
What is it about cartomancy and cards that has held sway over people for so long? Right? Why is it that this practice keeps going and enduring? I think there are a couple things that are really important to this conversation. One is, especially in this modern age, we are more and more visually literate. And so if you think about how much time you spend on Instagram, social media, watching TV, and all of these kinds of things, we understand visual symbolism in a way that we maybe did not so much before, right? And we can see this somewhat loosely in the history of the cards, right? There's this place at which symbols were clearly culturally relevant. We all knew who the Pope was, if we're looking at the Marseille deck, because, well, there's a Pope and we're involved in that culture. If we look at sort of the more middle period towards the modern end, we have this sort of proliferation of esoteric symbolism where things have concrete and specific meanings, and we move forward into the Rider-Waite deck and so on, which starts to transition from this set body of esoteric specific meanings that we see in the occult decks into decks that are more visually accessible. You know, we have illustrated pip cards. We have this process where we can now look at the cards and say what they mean, and we can start to interpret them. And if you start layering our contemporary approach with the proliferation of cards and options on cards and our contemporary visual language, then we start to see what modern tarot becomes like. And that is something that everybody can relate to on some level, especially if you find a deck that is visually cognizant with your worldview or with your approach. I think number two, the cards themselves are a more satisfying and immediate relationship than maybe some other forms of divination. Runes are dandy, but if you look at something that looks like a little arrow, what does it actually mean? You know, you need to know a bunch about it in order to start accessing that. Whereas when you flip the death card and you look at it, you can say, oh, look at that. Something's going to die. Something's going to end here. And certainly as a reader, it's something that's way more accessible to people receiving the readings to be able to point at a card and say, look at this thing here. See what's going on. See how there are three people in the lover's card and the person in the middle is trying to navigate between the other two options or other two people. It's something that people can relate to and remember in a way that we have to rely on storytelling and dialogue to create that in other systems that are less visually full. I think one of the other things that's really important about tarot cards is that they are deeply syncretic. That is, they will absorb and work with whatever it is that you might be working with yourself. And so for me, having started in the Thoth deck and esoteric tarot and Western ceremonial magic and moved my way back in history, at least cartomantically, towards the Marseille deck, I find that Marseille approach can hold all of those different styles that I know and all of that information in my head because it isn't concretely tied to any particular symbolism that's at least currently universally valid. It allows for the application of psychology, the application of esotericism, the application of numerology, the application of any number of storytelling approaches to generate and create that while still holding true to that structure. And I think that this is one of the things that's really important about it. And I think that, you know, the last thing that we can sort of maybe say, or I'm going to end with this, is, you know, one of the deepest values of tarot is that there are a variety of traditions and a variety of approaches which are all valid. And you can practice one or the other or another, or you can practice all of them, perhaps, as I tend to. But at the end of the day, the tarot cards themselves become like a bird song, full of meaning and wide open to interpretation and application. If you're interested in learning more about approaching tarot, my book, Simply Learn Tarot, is available in a digital download version for free by jumping on my newsletter at thehermitslamp.com. It's also available in hard copy through Amazon anywhere in the world, as well as locally at my store in Toronto. If you're interested in hearing more about tarot, there have been all sorts of wonderful and amazing tarot guests on my podcast, which you can find under The Hermit's Lamp wherever you are getting your podcasts currently. Finally, if you are a tarot aficionado looking for some wonderful opportunities to find new decks, my store, The Hermit's Lamp, in Toronto or online at thehermitslamp.com, carries over 350 different decks which you can explore and have fun with. We'll be happy to either see you in person or ship them to you wherever you are.
So that's Andrew McGregor. Thank you so much for doing that, Andrew. And please support the podcast. He's a great resource to use. Also a wonderful teacher. He does courses within the city of Toronto. He's the bee's knees, the cat's pajamas. He's
amazing.
He's a great guy as well.
What a peach.
But the best teacher is you and your experience, your journey, period. Work on this. Be confident. You have the skills. Trust me on this. If I have to suggest books, and I must, the first is going to be Paul Hewson's Mystical Origins of the Tarot. It's a wonderful book. Goes through some of the origins of the tarot cards and the Mamluk cards. He's got some fixed meanings in there, but I think it's more interesting to see how the trumps of tarot cards came into effect, and it has more to do with theater than it does with anything else.
Oh, wow.
It's a really great book. Andrew McGregor has written a book called A Tarot of You. Really great book if you're trying to figure out which deck you need or how to tell your story. It's a wonderful book to head to. Definitely look it up. He's got Simply Learn Tarot, which you can download from his website. It's free. You can order a copy of it, but I will include a link to that in the show notes. Italo Calvino, the Cuban novelist, he wrote a book called The Castle of Crossed Destinies, in which he tells stories using tarot cards. It's very interesting, and it's a good way to try and see, I see why that image has this happen in a story. Then the stories aren't great, but it's more about the method as to how he tells the story with the images on the tarot cards themselves. It's fantastic. Once you get how to use regular playing cards or just any other kind of cards for telling a story, there are plenty of options, and all gloves are off. Just branch out as much as you can. For myself personally, I found very effective there was a book released not too long ago by Jose Leato called The Book of St. Cyprian, The Sorcerer's Treasure. It has some methods of Iberian cartomancy in there, and that's really interesting to me. So I use that. In a book called Cypriana Old World, Jake Stratton-Kent, who's a huge hero of mine, goes through how he uses Cyprianic cartomancy. Also very good to look into. I believe Hadean Press has a book as well, just called Cyprianic Cartomancy. This shit is my jam, and I really like it. So learn old ways of using cartomancy and how they told their story. Different cultures brought new ideas into the mix. Find them, seek them out. Another deck that I use quite often is called the Baraja Gitana. I bought it in Mexico. I'm not going to list what decks of tarot cards are my favorite. I'll wait till the tarot episode for that one. Sorry, everybody. You have to wait a little bit longer for that. For now, I like historic decks. I'll just put it that way. The older the deck, the more currency I think it has. I'm just a bit of a history junkie. But create your story. That's all I'm going to say. Strange things happen. It may seem like you're just making it up. Yes, you are. That's the fucking point. Incredible things happen when you're just making it up. That's self-fulfilling. Don't see it as a delusion. It's not. Try to see it as dexterity. That's it, Brad.
Nice.
You made it.
I'm going to do some divination using Cards Against Humanity.
Do it.
Which would be hysterical.
I think you could.
Could you?
I think most likely. I mean, the words, there's just words, but you never know.
I could tell a really interesting story.
No doubt. Brad, you did it. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. So, I know this episode is a couple of days late. There's a good reason for that. Everybody, I have come up with a survey for you to complete, should you want. It will be a survey of topics that might be used in upcoming episodes. Now, I know I say to everybody, I give a list of 25 topics to my guests. They get to pick one. I come up with those topics. I am the arbiter of those 25 topics. But I'm thinking, let's switch it up a little bit. I want to know what you guys want to hear me talk about. I want to maybe hone it down to 15 topics. So if you guys go to my website, whatmagicisthis.com, there you will find a survey. You get 10 picks as to what topics you can choose. choose wisely. You get only 10 picks. There's about 50 of them there. And then I give you a little space there to say, hey, you didn't list this topic, and you only get 3 of those. If you put down more than 3, I'm going to delete your response. So sorry about that. But please head to whatmagicisthis.com. I want to know what you guys find interesting. So let's make it a little bit more egalitarian, this podcast, I'd say. Let's really see what you guys want to talk about.
And teamwork makes the dream work.
Teamwork makes the dream work. 100%. So, for those of you interested, head to whatmagicisthis.com. There you will find links to my show notes. I go out of my way for these show notes, guys. They're going to be great. This one, there's going to be some show notes on there. They'll be pretty good. But again, the research you do yourself is the most important part. Also, on my website, you will have links to how to subscribe to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Radio Public. If they've got podcasts, I'm listed there. There's even a little button that if you're on an Android device, you just click that and it'll subscribe. Also on my website, whatmagicisthis.com, you will find my Twitter account, my Instagram account, and my Facebook account. So head there to find all of those. I'm getting better at Twitter, and actually I'm putting up some really cool links there. So that's a good place if you can't get enough What Magic Is This or of me, Doug. Good place to head to. If you have a question, please reach out to me, guys. I'm very approachable, and I will answer your questions. I mean, I'm not gonna do your tarot fortune for you. Sorry, I'm just gonna put that out there right now. Maybe I should have added that to the very beginning. I'm not gonna read your cards for you. But if you have questions or you just want to say, "Great work, Doug," please send them my way. I'm getting a lot of feedback, and the feedback has been fantastic. Let's keep growing this podcast. I love doing this, and I love sharing these things with people. Please reach out. You can find out how to do that through my website as well. And that's the end of the show, Brad. It's been amazing.
I've enjoyed every minute.
Perfect. Me as well. And so we're going to end the show with the post-show quid pro quo.
Uh-oh.
And this is where I get to ask you a question, Brad. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, buddy. Here we go. Bradley. Brad. Bruh.
Yes, all of the above.
What is your favorite fairy tale and why?
That's an interesting one. I've always liked Hansel and Gretel.
Great.
It's an interesting, but I like the original.
Yeah, the old school, terrifying.
Yeah, terrifying. Anything grim.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the original tales are much more interesting than the Disneyfied versions.
Always.
Yeah, she gets pushed in the oven.
What?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a tale that's applicable to most aspects of your life.
No matter how hard
Yeah.
you plan something and you think that, laying breadcrumbs, you think you've got a plan in action, there's always going to be something that's going to kibosh it.
Or not.
Or not.
Which is the exciting part.
Yeah.
Because I think Hansel and Gretel got what they wanted.
Yeah.
They got sugar, they got, a nice warm place to stay and a little extra heat.
There you go.
And they got rid of their problem.
Nice.
No, I think it's one of my favorite. I don't know why I find it so engaging, but
That's the thing about fairy tales is that everybody has their favorite one, and they can't really explain why. It's a tough question. Why is that your favorite fairy tale? But it's just like there's some stories that just resonate.
They resonate. The problems in your life, they can come back and bite you, but you can choose to have them not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful, Brad. This has been great. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. You knocked it out of the park.
I tried my hardest.
I would hope that sometime in the future, if I asked you to come back, you would.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, Brad. Brad, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been What Magic Is This? My name is Douglas Batchelor, and we will talk at you all soon. Stay luminous. Bye-bye.